good morning again. We're going to use the next 5 minutes or so to do a quick going over the agenda so that by 11:30, when we may have others join us, we are ready to go. I am Carolyn Trent Sandiford, of course. I am your sister in that Seawell group. And I want to say I was very excited when Dr. Maivit and our acting president, Deborah, requested that we have a session for the Belize chapter of the Caribbean Institute of Women in Leadership. I felt that it was so very important, particularly as we begin the process of navigating the journey forward for Seawell. So today, our agenda is going to be very simple. Clearly, we will start. We've asked that you do the registration as well as take the online survey, which is really at the end, but we kind of brought forward that. We're going to have a series of polling questions. Those polling questions are linked to some specific questions that we want to be answered in order to write a report and in order for us to, as we continue to say, shape the future. So we're going to have a polling question that will speak to what are the immediate issues and priority actions that you all see as very important in terms of addressing the issues and challenges that you're going to raise that are confronting us today. We're going to look at the world and Belize by 2045, meaning that we have to be visionary and we have to start thinking of the world and the future that we want to create and what those issues and those actions ought to be. We want to hear your perception as to whether you have hope for future for Belize and the world. Is there an optimism? Is there a fountain springing or from our Seawell chapter as to what kind of future we can create for Belize and the Caribbean and certainly make our contributions to the world? We want to hear from you about whether you believe that global collaboration, particularly through the UN, is vital in terms of addressing some of the issues and challenges that you are going to raise, as well as how you perceive the UN, and then what would be some of your recommendations in terms to the UN in terms of how they improve on the work that they're doing in Belize and as well, of course, globally. And so that more or less is the agenda that we will be following. We will start the session with a brief presentation, which I have put together. I have used it for local government that we recently had a conversation with. And I felt that it was also important because perhaps it will underscore to some extent where are some of the key issues and areas that we have to look at in terms of shaping this future. The UN dialogue is all about hearing from you, the people, as to what it is that the UN ought to do, the course of action that the UN is taking. UN is celebrating 75 years, and in 2045, they will be celebrating 100. For Belize, by 2045, we will be celebrating 65 years of being an independent nation in the heart of the Caribbean and Central America. So we, as women, we need to see how is it that we're going to make our mark on the course and on the future of Belize. So having said that, just a quick presentation, and then we're going to start the great conversation. So Perla? Oh, and we have with us Perla. She has joined us for our final two dialogues, and she's been doing a great job because she's so technologically conscious, which I am not. So Perla, if we can have
good morning, everyone.
If you can say hi, Perla, you want to say hi?
Yes, saying hi. I'll share the presentation one moment.
Okay, thank you. Great. As one of the gist of this our whole conversation is that we're aware that the UN and countries like Belize signed on to the Millennium Development Goals, which expired on 2015 and which transitioned into the Sustainable Development Goals, which is between 2015 and 2030. And so the world has set particular goals such as eliminating poverty, hunger, gender equality, addressing climate actions, improving partnerships, infrastructure, innovation, and so many goals and targets, 17 SDGs in all. And those were set to be achieved by 2030. So the world was on a pathway. And COVID-19 certainly has upended and reconfigured the way we do things. And so this conversation is so very timely, because now we are going to start talking about not only the global trends that are taking place, but how these global trends of climate change, urbanization, inequality, rising crime and violence, and so on and so forth, is not only global in a sense, but really they're localized and they're nationalized. So this presentation is really capturing in a very short way, in a very brief way, what is also happening in Belize. One of the first things that is happening for us in Belize is that we're urbanizing. And it is something that we have not necessarily been taking any consideration of. It is not highlighted or elevated in any way in the national discourse. And one of the reasons is that we tend to still speak of Belize as a rural country. So we have more rural population. The recent statistics, 2010, we're getting ready for the 2021 housing and population census. But the base of that, of the 2010 population census, says that we have a 55% rural population and a 45% urban. Now, if you look at the screen and you look at the chart on your left, you're seeing globally that the rural population is declining and the urban population is increasing. And it's the same thing that's happening in Belize. It's simply because of the way we define our settlements. For example, we consider urban only the 7 towns and the 2 cities. So every other settlement in Belize is considered rural. The reality, though, is that there are several settlements that are taking urban form and urban function. And so in reality, you have 55% of our settlements that are urban and 45% that are rural. And I will share this with you. Next slide. We have in Belize what we call the rise of the intermediate settlements. And we call them intermediate because in the sense of the hierarchy, you have the cities, you have the towns, and then you have the villages. But villages, as I've said, in Belize, there's really no clear definition of a village other than it being having 200 persons that can vote. And that is the extent of how we define the village. But if you look at the 2010 population census, you will see that Ladyville has a population of 5,458. That is more than Punta Gorda town, which has 5,351, but yet Punta Gorda is a town and Ladyville is a village. If you add Ladyville and Lord's Bank, you will see a population of 8,598. That is more than Benke, which is a town. So what you're beginning to see in Belize is some villages, you're having an agglomeration of villages that are forming together. And then you're also seeing villages that are merging with existing urban defined areas. For example, Trial Farm, which has a population of 4,264, has merged with Orange Walk Town for now a total of 17,972. Now, typically, San Ignacio Town is considered the second largest urban area after Belize City. But when you see villages now merging with towns, you're seeing like Orange Walk Town has really become the second and not San Ignacio. And you're seeing many other villages, Independence, Bella Vista, Shipyard. These are only a few villages where their populations are growing very much so, some exponentially. And they're still considered villages and have no governance system whatsoever to address or manage their growth and development. Next slide, Perla. This is happening at a time when there is also an aging of Belize's population. If you look at the population pyramids moving from 2000 to 2010 to 2020, what you're seeing from 2000 is the typical triangle-shaped pyramid that has at the very base a very strong youthful population. But as it begins to move to 2010 and moving on to 2020, what you're beginning to see is that the youthful population is becoming less, and the population, as it progresses, the population is becoming more an aging population. And you can see it in terms of looking at the pyramid, because if you look at the very base of the pyramid in 2000, where you see the 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, they have the higher percentages of the population. But then when you start looking at the 2010 and the 2020, you begin to see that their percentages beginning to fall. So what we're beginning to see then in Belize, as I've said, is an aging population. We are seeing urbanization. And this is also at a time when there is climate change and pre-existing urban development challenges. Can you, next slide, Perla? So climate change will bring about rising sea levels, as we know, more intense storms and extreme flooding, higher temperatures, and even more so in these same urban areas, particularly the areas where you're seeing streets are being cemented and asphalted, buildings are being constructed, multi-storied, concrete buildings, higher densities. These communities, as they're being developed, are going to absorb more heat, which then increases the temperature of that particular community or that particular ecosystem where these buildings are, to be higher than that would have been normal, and even higher because of climate change. And of course, we're seeing unpredictable weather. The recent flooding in Belize really underscores that to some extent, to a large extent, that is. Next slide, Perla. And this is happening at a time when we also have what we call pre-existing urban development challenges. Poverty, environmental degradation, high crime and violence, overburdened social services, insufficient leisure and recreational space, rise in deaths from non-communicable diseases, overgrown vacant lots, urban blight and decay, proliferation of squatter settlements and inefficient urban sprawl, traffic congestion, broken infrastructure, deteriorating building stock and housing deficit, and also gentrification, where we are beginning to lose our sense of that cultural heritage, that community voice, traditions and values, and so on and so forth. Next slide, Perla, which is our final slide. And so then what we're having is what we call the convergence or a multiplying effect. Urbanization converging with climate change, converging with pre-existing urban development challenges. What is that doing? It's intensifying urban development challenges and urban poverty, and it is disproportionately affecting vulnerable populations, as it is increasing the vulnerability of marginalized communities and peoples. And who make up vulnerable populations? Women are at the center of those vulnerable populations. The elderly, persons living with HIV, AIDS, diabetes, non-communicable diseases, which 47% of all the deaths in Belize are by non-communicable diseases. And what we are also seeing is that the mortality rate linked to COVID-19 is due to comorbidity. So it's not just the impact of COVID-19, it's also the impact of COVID-19 along with other diseases, non-communicable diseases like hypertension, respiratory diseases, and so on and so forth. As well, 57.9% and 36.2% of our population living along the coast within 25 kilometers, and we have at least 25% living on floodplains. What we're also seeing is that Belize is losing every year $123 million or 246 million Belize dollars in terms of wind or flood related damages. So all the development gains that we're making towards achieving our SDGs are being eroded. And it is within this context that women have to start thinking about how is it that we navigate the way forward in terms of the development of Belize. So having set the stage with that brief presentation, then we can start looking at the issues and the challenges of Belize and the global community through a gender lens or through the perspective of women, how you see the issues, what you think ought to be the priority actions, and we're going to start having that conversation now. Couple things, the way we want to do it. One, there is a chat. So Perla is going to start post our first polling question as the priority action. But priority action is linked to priority issues. So we want you to start thinking that considering all that you have just seen, and it was a brief presentation, capturing some of the challenges that we have, based on what you're seeing, what would you consider as women some of the priority issues that must be addressed now, immediately, not tomorrow, not next week, not 5 years from now, now? What are the priority issues and what are the priority actions that must be taken to address these issues the UN wants to do to inform their agenda, their programs? So you can put it in the chat. There is the poll that we ask that you vote on, because by voting in the poll, we will see what are the issues that are common to you all and the issues that you're coalescing around. And finally, you can open your mic and raise your hand, and we will call upon you to speak as to how you see these issues and basically what are the solutions. So we want to talk issues, but if we have an issue, let's start talking also solution. So the poll is open, the chat is open, and the mics, I would like to see them open. Let's start the conversation. Anyone on the I see us voting already. Anyone wishing to speak on the issue immediately? Anyone? All you need to do, Rebecca, I see your mic unmuted. Would you like to speak? Rebecca? Okay, let's see. Anyone wish to put their thoughts in the chat as to what would be an immediate issue that you see confronting Belize today, and then what would be that priority action that you want to take? You can raise your hand. Like I said, Perla has put in the chat the poll. Please, you can respond by the chat, or you can respond by unmuting and speaking on the issue. Anyone?
Good morning. Hi, Caroline.
Good morning.
This is Debbie.
Go right ahead, Debbie.
Based on your presentation, it has dawned on me that it seems like healthcare then should be an issue for us. If we are one of the three sectors in terms of vulnerable population, then I think that we need to prioritize healthcare for our women. And in terms of priority action, I don't know much about where the NHI is. I don't know if anybody here in this group would know more about how that is being rolled out. And how far they are along in that area. So I see the healthcare for women, and if maybe NHI can be a possible priority action.
Okay. Excellent. NHI healthcare for women and NHI could be an immediate response. I myself don't know fully as to how far NHI has been rolled out. I know for certain that it was in some parts of the country, but I know it was not for the entire country. So perhaps that is something that one needs to look at. If I can read as well from the chat, and please remember, there is a poll. If you can click on the poll and vote and put in your thoughts as to what a priority action would be. That is also helpful to us, because then we can see what are some of the issues that you're coalescing around. Let's hear from Cynthia. She says health and wellness for all. That ought to be an immediate action. Charlene is saying poverty alleviation, investment in adequate housing, health education, and assistance to reduce comorbidity. Wow. Cynthia is also saying priority action, public education campaign on diet and exercise. So let's see what the poll is saying. It's saying healthcare, infrastructure, crime. Wow, it keeps changing. Let's see. All right, so we see land. Land is jumping out. Interesting. Land is jumping out. Healthcare access to education, housing, crime. Healthcare is also there a lot. So it comes with healthcare. It comes with healthcare access to education. It says healthcare and wellness, health, infrastructure. We're also seeing in the chat as well, health and wellness and housing from Carla. She's saying health and wellness and housing. And so these are some great priority actions coming from women, considering, as you have said, and as we have seen, what are some of the issues or the challenges that are confronting us today in terms of development challenges, whether it's climate change and the impact it's going to have on our society, and the fact that it will disproportionately impact on the poor, on women and children and elderly or vulnerable population, persons living with diverse ability, and so on and so forth. We have seen issues of flooding that was recently in Belize. We saw the impact it had, where in some areas it was not just about flooding, COVID-19, but it was also about flooding intersecting with COVID-19. In the chat, we're also seeing environmental planning to reduce the impact from climate change. So these are some great recommendations coming through the lens of women. Is there anyone else who wish to speak on the, I've seen the chat, Deborah has spoken. Women, you can't be shy.
Caroline?
Yes?
Hi, Dannelyn here. Good morning.
Go right ahead, Dannelyn. Good morning.
In the context of your presentation, what really suddenly gripped me so deeply is the fact that you mentioned the housing depletion insufficient due to urbanization, and tying that with the fact that so many households are women-led significantly in Belize. It really dawned on me that the matter of affordable housing is a primary concern for women, recognizing their significantly leading household, the matter of women being so strongly in poverty in terms of immediate, and now that suddenly just loomed very, very center and forward for me as a point out of your presentation and bringing it together for me as a point. So I find that striking. I find that rather striking.
Excellent. Well, I think that was why one of the reasons we felt that perhaps putting some of the data for Belize together, we can start looking at it a little bit through a woman lens. How is it that women are perceiving the issues that are impacting on us, and what should be priority issues for women? And clearly that is what we want from this conversation. We've spoken, for example, to people from local government, and some of the issues they raise, for example, has a lot to do with financing to address some of these key developmental challenges and capacity to do so. And so coming from varying groups, and this is the whole purpose of the dialogue, that we try to gather the thoughts and the ideas and the solutions from perhaps groupings that maybe traditionally voices we would not have heard, and how it impacts each grouping differently. So that's a good point, Danielaine. Van Jen says, housing, climate change, and health education. Good. So we have quite some great recommendations in terms of what would be some priority issues in terms that you would want to see that the UN address, and in partnership, of course, with the government of Belize. Now, we've spoken, we started this conversation, and as I have mentioned, that UN is celebrating 75 years of existence, and in the next 25 years, in 2045, they will be celebrating 100 years. Belize, on the other hand, will be celebrating 65 years of independence. So if we think of 2045, and we think of the future, and we think of ourselves within Belize, and that Belize is part of a global community, what do you see for the future of Belize, considering what are the pressing issues and challenges that we are seeing in front of us, that we are discussing? What do you see for the future? Do you think that Belize is going to be better off, and the global community? Do you think that Belize is going to be worse off? Do you think that Belize is going to be the same? And we want to have that conversation within the context of what we have just seen. So Perla, I'm going to ask you if you can put that poll in the chat for us to start thinking about the future. Because this conversation is also about the future. And it's also a relay about the future that we want to create. And to create a future, we must know then, where is it that we want to go, where we are now, and what are the gaps? So if we have set out on a pathway towards the Sustainable Development Goals, reducing poverty, hunger, gender inequality, better access to education, healthcare, innovation, infrastructure, climate action, and so on and so forth. Where are we today? And what is it that we need to do to get to the future that we want? But what is that future? So we need to then start thinking a little bit about the future that we want to shape. So 2045, 25 years from now, do you have hope for Belize and the global community that is going to be a better place? Is it going to be a worse place? Or is it going to be as is? In other words, are we going to be better off? Are we going to be worse off? And are we going to be status quo, same old, same old? So again, the chat is open. The chat is open for you to make your comments. The mics can be unmuted. Please let us hear you. We need to hear more people. We need to hear your perspective as to this future that you want to see. Because if you don't know the future that you want to create, then it is often said that you will never get there. So we want to start talking, will we be better off? Will we be worse off, or will we be the same? And why? Why are you thinking this way? Why you have hope for a better future? Why you're saying, well, it's going to be the same, or why do you think we're going to be worse off? So already we're seeing in the polls, we're seeing most people are saying better off. We have a few saying the same, coming in second, and third, worst off. So can we hear in the chat? Can you unmute, raise your hand, and start talking about why you are voting this way? Let's start hearing you. Any
Hi,
takers?
Carolyn, Carla Barnett
Yes,
here.
go right ahead,
Yeah,
Carla.
very interesting discussion going on here. I have to be optimistic because if I am not optimistic, and if we as a group are not optimistic, then that I think therefore I am becomes the way it evolves. But that optimism has to be rooted in a desire and an ability of women and of policymakers and of or citizens, a willingness to be able to take frank assessments of where we are and the kinds of changes that we need to make. Changes in governance processes come to the top. And I'm not only talking about governance processes within Belize, I'm also talking about global governance processes. Look, for example, at how the US put Paris agreement on the back burner and broke up essentially the agreements that had been reached at that level. So it's a desire to do things better, a desire to work together differently, a desire to listen to all voices, because all voices have the right to be heard wherever those voices are coming from, whether they're women's voices, young people's voices, old people's voices, technical people's voices. All voices have a right to be heard and to be respected. And unless we are willing, this is the largest we, to do things differently, then that undermines our ability to achieve the optimistic targets that we are setting. If it's continuous same old, then we're not going to see any positive change. And I like the fact that the UN commence this conversation, because it's absolutely important for us to understand that unless we learn to work together at the international level and at the national level, it really is undermining our common development into the future. This is true of us in Belize. This is true in CARICOM. This is true at within the UN system. We have to learn how to work together, and to assess where we are, where we're coming from, as you put it, and where we want to go, because it's that continuity is absolutely important. So I am optimistic, because I have to be optimistic, but it requires all of us to be optimistic and willing to do the things that need to be done to work together differently and better.
Excellent. That's inspiring. Very much so. And so we have from Cynthia Eve says, I think we will be better off. I agree with Dr. Barnett that we must have a positive vision for our future so we as women can work towards that vision. We must have a firm vision of the world we want our children and grandchildren to grow up in, and then work together towards the creation of that world. So
Hi,
we're
Carolyn,
seeing
could I
then great
share also?
optimism. Of course, go right ahead.
So while I believe in optimism, I am grounded in reality.
Can you say a name, please?
Oh, this is Aria Lightfoot. Sorry.
Yes, so everyone knows. Yes, go right ahead.
While I believe in optimism, I think that we need to be grounded in reality, and there's a lot of benchmarks that we are failing horribly at as a nation. And I think even from the UN perspective, the UN has to become accountable themselves to the more powerful nations, where many times the criticism is that, the powerful nations get away with certain things that they're not held to the same standards with. But just on a 2045, all indicators are that we're moving in a very fast, technologically based world, and poor nations are way behind. Literally, when it comes to the laws, many times the poor nations, the laws haven't caught up to the technology and different stuff. So while it's great to be positive, unless we start going in and doing the work and identifying where our weaknesses are and starting to put things in place to correct issues and to start thinking more progressively, I can't see how we would be better off, even with the most optimism, without the work that's part of it.
Okay, interesting. So basically, you're saying there are some benchmarks that we need to start looking at and addressing before we can, which is which is more or less like a reality check. I think you're asking for. There needs to be this reality check. So that contributes to perhaps giving some input into, yes, we can be optimistic, but these are some of the issues that we also have to address for that. This then starts to put us into what I would call the future priorities then, because we have seen where there are certain issues that we need to address now, immediately, not like we said next year, next week, next 2 years from now, 5 years from now. These are things that we need to do now. But if we're going to join the optimism, and there most people are optimistic of that future. Yes, we have persons who are saying, well, we'll be worse off, and those who say we're going to be the same. But the majority of you all who are in this conversation are saying, well, we're optimistic. But then if we are to reach this future, we also have to deal with certain issues or certain challenges that have to be addressed. So if we can then start talking about what are some of the things or what are some of the priority issues that you think the UN and the country needs to start looking at in terms of the future. We've looked at immediate. What are the priority issues that are immediate? What are the priority actions that we must take now? Understanding that certain actions that we take also lead to long-term gains. So if we can start thinking 2045, if we want to create and shape this future that we want to see, and as Eve put it, the future for children, for grandchildren, what it is that needs to happen in 2045. What are the priority issues? What are the priority actions? So our next poll then focuses on what are the priority issues that we would want to address, and then what are the priority actions. So similarly to our previous poll, we want you to start talking. Click on the link. The link has been put in by Perla in terms of future priority actions. What are those actions that you want to see? And we want to also see it in the chat. You can make a note in the chat, speak to what are those actions, as well as unmute the mic. Can you unmute the mic? And let us start hearing from you as well. So it's not just in the chat, and it's not just in the poll, but we also want to start hearing from you. Anyone want to take on that question?
Hi, Carolyn.
The issue, and what would be your priority action for the future? Go right ahead.
Hi, Valerie here.
Go right ahead, Valerie.
Great discussion so far. In terms of future, I don't as optimistic as I want to be and as hopeful as I am. I still think that for it to be meaningful, we need to address gender representation at our highest level. We are poorly lacking in that area. And when you look around the globe at some of the leaders, you cannot avoid the fact that some of the outstanding performers, quite frankly, have been women, grappling with issues that are not quote unquote women issues only, but they have taken their countries out of debt, or they are working towards a viable plan on it. They have tackled the pandemic with a level of vigilance and authority that has been hailed by so many, including in the UN. And quite frankly, they have taken on positions that some of the larger countries have, in specifically the US, have broken away from. They have tackled it square on. So I think when we talk future priorities, we cannot have the discussion without gender equality in leadership. Equality, equitability as a separate matter, but I'm talking more of having your governance structure reflect what your country looks like and what your country is. And that is through a gender lens. So I think gender equality is right up there. There are other points, but I do think that ranks high.
Excellent. And I think the issue that you pointed out, that the issues that we have to address, they're not all women issues, but women have been able to tackle them nonetheless. And so this is why it is so important that gender equality becomes a priority issue for the future. And if I can go by the poll, what the poll is saying, clearly what is also jumping out from you is gender equality in leadership. I am seeing that as a priority issue jumping out. We see those other issues as well, sustainable development, which again, if we go to the SDGs, we will know that gender equality is an SDG. Access to mobility, education for all, again, another SDG. Removal of barriers, end of corruption, healthcare, public education, accountability. Gender equality is just jumping out at us now. Public education, let us see. Yes. Anyone else wish to add to this? What the future priority actions? We're seeing gender equality jumping out. So clearly that is a priority action so far that this group is coalescing around. And there are other issues that you all have raised as well. Carla Jenkins is saying a priority action in the future should be leadership development. So that is coming out of the chat. Anyone wish to unmute their mic? Let's feel free to speak. This is a conversation that wants to share and hear of the women's, what are the women, how women are perceiving the issues that have to be addressed. But as important, what actions have to be taken in order to address these challenges that we are seeing. And as has been pointing out, many of the challenges that we're confronted with, whether it's climate change, whether it's urbanization, whether it is rising poverty, crime, and violence, we have seen where there's been an increase in gender-based violence. We have seen where women, the elderly, persons living with diverse ability. We had a conversation in one of our groups where people who were living, having children with autism. Recently with the COVID-19, we've heard conversations of persons who, women in particularly, who are also having the burden of being responsible for elderly parents living within their household. So even though there are big issues, COVID-19, climate change, etc., it is all impacting on women, and women are disproportionately, certainly disproportionately so. And what you all are saying is that one of the future actions in order for us to address this has to be dealt with through gender equality in our leadership, to ensure that development is perceived through a gender lens. From Adela, I am seeing financial freedom for women at the grassroots level. She's saying that's an important future priority that we also have to look at. So if we're looking at all these issues then, and we're seeing issues, is there anyone else? Am I missing anyone else who wish to open their mic at this point in time? Anybody else?
May I say a little word here?
Go right
Carolyn?
ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I 100% agree with the contribution from Valerie about the essential need for gender equality. And one of the things that I believe we have to strive for is to stop hearing the conversation of women's issues and other issues, because all issues are women's issues. Whether the economy is doing well or not well, that's a women's issue. Whether or not all issues are women's issues. And what we are seeing, what we live every day, is an absence from the table where those decisions, all those decisions that affect women are made, and we are not involved in those decisions. And therefore, the issue of gender equality for me has to be number one. It has to be both an end that we're looking for and a process through which we're going to achieve the improvement that we're looking for. So gender equality is a process and an end in itself. And therefore, when we get to 2045, we want that to be the case. You know how when we were growing up and you see a cabinet of all men, how nobody is surprised? Do you ever dream of a day when you see a cabinet of all women and nobody is surprised?
Nobody will be surprised.
Exactly. And until we can get to that where there are no institutional barriers that stand in the way of women so that there is equal opportunity for all, that fight will never end. Yes. That fight will never end. So one of the things that I try to do all the time is, so when we're talking about women's issues, I make sure I say that all issues are women's issues. We are not supposed to be closed out of discussion of any issues at all, because all issues affect us, whether it's housing, health, employment, public debt. All of those things affect us at the level of our households. You know, and therefore we want to be sure that we are at the table discussing all of those issues, not only women's issues, which tend to be the kind of caregiving. People see that, even though that is not what it is, people see women's issues as those kinds of issues, whereas we need to be at all the issues.
Great point. And I think perhaps what you're also saying, and I hope I'm not taking this the wrong way, in that we want to be at a place where you're not hearing the first woman and the first woman, but rather it's just a case where it is accepted that women are in positions, because that is what the society now reflects.
Exactly, and because they are fully capable of doing the same work and better.
Absolutely.
You know, that is it.
So from Carla, we're also hearing leadership development inclusive of an increased awareness of internalized biases and prejudices that as women we hold of each other, which leads us not collaborating effectively with each other. So those are some great contributions in terms of future priority actions. And because we are discussing issues and actions, the question then becomes for us, is the United Nations vital for the kind of cooperation that we need to address these issues? And when we started this conversation, we localized the issues of urbanization, of climate change, of the impact an aging population is going, the implications of an aging population. We have looked at all the other issues that can impact and have implications to women. And as continuously we're hearing through this, that these are all issues that, yes, they impact and have implications to the growth and development of a woman, but they are all women's issues. In other words, there is no singular issue that is a woman's issue. All developmental issues are women issues. And because that is the case, and because all of these issues that we are talking about, these big trends, climate change, urbanization, the demographic shifts that we're beginning to see, issues of gender inequality, and so on and so forth. If we are to address these issues, is global cooperation important, and is the United Nations vital to dealing with this? And so what we're beginning to see is that, yeah, we're getting the yes, where people are, so far we're hearing that UN is very important to addressing these challenges. From Deborah, we are seeing that she spoke of dismantling of structures where married women seem to lose their individuality. Adelma says, agree, all development issues are women's issues. And so having said all that, then can we look at the UN and can you all give your thoughts as to whether you believe that global cooperation then to address all these issues that we spoke of? Because while we are talking of them locally, there are also global issues. We spoke of the impact of COVID-19, the economic, the social impact, and all the other impacts of COVID-19, and the effect that the fact that it has impacted disproportionately again certain segments of our population. This did not start in Belize, it started in China and traveled to Belize. Issues of climate change, it is not just about Belize, what happens in any other country. And I think we have heard the issue that Dr. Barnett raised a little earlier, where she spoke of the global governance, because climate change is not an issue that is just that originates in Belize or impacts Belize. In fact, we contribute very minusculely to the global warming. But the reality is that these are issues that are confronting an entire global society and an entire global community. So is global cooperation through UN vital to deal with these challenges of today and the future? And it seems to be the overwhelming response is yes. So having said that, then I want to ask the question, how do you as women see the United Nations? How would you describe the United Nations? And I'm going to ask Perla to put that in the chat, that link in the chat. But in the meantime, in terms of the global cooperation, if anyone wishes to add anything to why they consider the UN important other than what has been said, please unmute. Please put it in the chat so that we can read it and hear what you're thinking in terms of why you're believing global cooperation is important. And again, as we move on, as we begin the process of winding down and moving towards the last question or two, how would you describe the United Nations? We have said that we consider the United Nations vital to global cooperation. What is the one word or the two words that you would define the United Nations? You can put it in the chat, like I said. You can vote. I'm hoping that everybody's going to vote. Let's start seeing the words that you would define the United Nations. In addition, like I said, put it in the chat and open the mics. We need to hear from you. Open the mics. Let's hear what you have to say in terms of how you would describe the United Nations. What words would you use? So we're beginning to see a few words. The first one is saying essential. So we're saying that United Nations is essential. That's how you perceive the United Nations. Another word that is being used to describe the United Nations, transformative. Wow, that's a good one. I always remember that when I attended my SEAWIL course, courtesy of organized at that time by the National Women's Commission and Anne-Marie Williams, the words that were used were transformational leaders. And so for those of you who may have gone to that course along with myself, you may remember that words. As women, we are transformative, and you're also saying that the United Nations is transformative, critical, can do more, enabler of freedoms, harmonizing. Someone is saying ineffective. Okay, so we need to, our next question that we will go to is how can they improve? So whoever is saying ineffective, think about ways in which the UN can improve in terms of addressing these challenges. So anybody wish to open their mics to speak on it? Valerie, I see you. Yeah, go right ahead.
I think maybe perhaps one of the reasons that we're not seeing as many words come out of this one like the others. I view, if I can use an analogy, perhaps not a very good one, but I'll try it anyway.
Mm.
When we think of the Chiquibull Forest, the Chiquibull Forest in Belize is so critical, essential. It's transformative in many ways, if you can consider that, or it can be in the development of Belize, all based on how we treat it, respect it, protect it, and responsibly develop it. But it is also very distant from the minds of Belizeans. And so a lot of Belizeans don't get to appreciate the intrinsic value of the Chiquibull Forest and what it means to their everyday living, to their household, to their quality of life. And oftentimes with the UN discussion, when you bring it down to the level of the household, to the level of the woman who is working multiple jobs, who's unemployed, who's uneducated, who is just struggling, who's battling domestic violence, how does it resonate to that individual, the actions of the UN? And I think, I won't use the word ineffective, but I do think the UN can do better in communicating the actions that it does, how it impacts on on that level, and how it helps to advance. We've heard all of it. We've heard the development goals, sustainable development goals. We've heard all of the fancy language used, but at the end of the day, just like with Chiquibull, Belizeans just want to understand, how does it impact me? What are the actions that you're doing when I see you have the rapporteur or you have the special UN envoy for what have you? How is that helping my quality of life? And because it's supposed to be the network, if you will, the global network of countries, and who particularly looks out for the more vulnerable and the more marginalized, I think that effort in communicating that message becomes even more critical, and possibly even more now because of this pandemic and the impacts that will resonate for years to come on our children, on our women now, on governments, for years to come. And what will UN's role be in ensuring that there is a different type of global cooperation and not the same old, same old?
Excellent. And I want you to put that recommendation when we bring up our final poll, which will be how the UN can improve. Because that is going to be very important, because we speak, and for me to capture what has been said here, how you describe the UN, we see essential, can do more, we see vital, transformational, enabler of freedoms, ineffective, harmonizing, transformative, critical. And so the whole concept then is that if we're seeing if we say enabler of freedom, transformational, clearly there's also room for improvement if we're also seeing ineffective, and so on and so forth. So then the next question then arises, and we can continue that conversation in the chat, as well as opening the mics. Please let us open the mics. How can the UN improve to address these challenges? And so Perla, if you can put that final poll question in the chat for us. How can the UN, and we've started already in getting a recommendation. So Valerie, I'm going to ask you to please put that in the poll. Once it's up, better communications in terms of the work that they have done to ensure that the work that they do resonates with people. Because as you have said, and I think it was a great analogy, often it's like, whether it's a Chiquibull, and sometimes it's even the oceans or the atmosphere, if it doesn't link back to you and your day-to-day struggles, then you're not thinking about it. How can the UN better manage these challenges? Excuse me. So my throat, it's going. So Sylvia says, agree with Valerie. Anybody else? Someone please take up. I need to just drink some water.
I think I think if I could add, I hope you get some relief there, Carolyn. As somebody mentioned earlier, I forget who it was, maybe it was Aria, who referred to you have members of the UN, and I think she was referring to the US, who don't necessarily abide by what the UN is asking for.
Okay, so anybody else want to add to what Valerie has said? Just excuse me, that little apology, my throat started to act up. Anybody else wants to add?
Carolyn, I was saying that.
Go right ahead, Valerie.
Yeah, I was just adding that, referring to what I believe it was Aria who stated earlier, where you have member countries such as the US and maybe another larger ones who don't necessarily abide or appear to be promoting what the UN is advancing or promoting. It would also be good when those, and it will happen, that will continue to occur because of the power play at hand, but it would be comforting for the other countries and citizens of those countries to hear from the UN on how they reconcile with those occurrences when it happens, because we're saying it's vital, we're saying that it's so essential, we need the UN, but the big guys, and sorry to use the gender-based term, but quite frankly tends to be mostly led by men. But the big guys are not following, they're not abiding, they're not promoting, and because they are so powerful, whether it be by military might or whether it be by financial might, there is this impression that they can get away with it. And we don't get to hear, or at least I haven't heard from any sort of message from the UN on how they reconcile that, and expect the rest of us to continue to buy in and to continue to strive for better, when those who are, G8 and so forth, G7 now, when we see some actions that just simply do not gel with that.
Hi, Carolyn, you're muted.
Yeah, so that also adds to the communication component as well, because you're also saying that it's a better communication in countries and how their actions resonate on the ground and has created positive impacts, but it is also to share with them how they have reconciled with those countries, those issues or actions of countries who, as we have seen from time to time, has gone against particular conventions or pulled out, as I think Dr. Barnett had indicated earlier, in terms of the climate change one and so on and so forth. We're also seeing reaching their intended beneficiaries. The UN has a place to place more focus on projects and programs that address, Perla, can you read this for me? My voice is going.
Yes, 1 second. You were on the...
Yeah, the UN has to place more focus.
Okay. Yeah, the UN has to place more focus on projects, programs that address local priorities rather than trying to force fit to address their global goals. We also have the UN can be more effective by holding all nations to the same standards. Many inequalities are caused by manipulation of the economies of smaller nations. The UN should put something in place to create a fund to offset these potential abuses. LDCs, lesser developed countries, have to be given a greater voice in decisions affecting them, and these LDCs must accept responsibility for their future and exercise their leadership on global matters by joining forces together. So these are the comments that
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Perla, because my voice seemed to be going. So a little apologies. I moved from an earlier dialogue straight into this one. So I probably needed to drink some more water or something. But thanks, Perla. Anybody else want to add to this?
Can I add a point, Caroline?
Go right ahead, Doc.
Yes, because this is where the optimism is tempered by the reality that Aria spoke of, because the ideals of the UN founded, you know, like our constitutions, on principles of equality and all of that, but the reality on the ground is a different one. Because the big countries rule, and the UN is the sum total of the nations, and the inequalities that come out reflect the inequalities among us. One of the things that I think the UN has to be willing to do, and perhaps this is what the SG is looking for, by doing this kind of conversation and encouraging the talk and giving everybody a voice, go back to its origins. When the UN was started in the mid-40s, this was after the Great War, when the whole world was falling apart, and there was a need that everybody understood, for there to be, remember, the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. And so all of these things came out of an understanding that we were all in a position where if we didn't come together and sort things out properly, we would all fail. And the European countries were pretty much on the verge of being failed states at that point. That's where they put countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. Now we are the ones who are on the verge of becoming failed states. The difference, of course, is that we are the little people in the big people's games. And therefore, if we don't find a way of organizing ourselves, if we don't find a way of calling attention to our particular issues, if we don't find a way to navigate politically and in the organizations in which we sit, we will continue to be on the periphery of the little countries that constantly are on the verge of becoming failed states. But what the world requires right now, because there is not a country in the world that's not been affected by the pandemic and the economic fallout of the pandemic, is some kind of understanding by the global system that in fact it is global and it is affecting all of us, and our countries, our economies bear a bigger burden, because if we parallel the women's issues discussion, we are the ones that are bearing the larger burden of the impact. Within our countries, women bear the larger impact, but in the global society of nations, our small countries are bearing the larger impact. And there is absolutely no recognition of this. And the UN has to be willing to stand out and insist that, in fact, the smaller countries are bearing the larger burden of this pandemic, because that is the state of play. That is the fact of the matter. And if the UN is not able to, not willing to, and I'm not saying the UN as the agency, I'm talking the UN as the community of nations. If it's not willing and able to accept that this is a problem that needs to be addressed in this way, then the United Nations as a system will continue to lose its global significance, because it will not mean much to countries like ours, and the US, it means nothing to them already. So, it's where the optimism, as I say, has to be tempered by the reality on the ground.
Excellent. And I thought that was a great capturing, perhaps, in terms of how is it that the UN has to move forward in terms of maintaining its credibility and relevance, and as you use the word, significance. And I want to read another comment that was made in terms of how the UN can better manage these challenges. It says education, the purpose, their impact on the world, and how we as a nation can benefit from the UN. So as all good things must come to an end, and as we wrap up in terms of this conversation with Seawill, I want to just read another comment from Aisha. I believe the UN only looks at the big countries. It's only equal on paper. And that goes to the point that the doctor just mentioned, that what it is that they need to do, and going back to its origin as to why the purpose, it's raison d'etre. Why is it that it came into existence post-World War, and perhaps that whole concept that as a global community, we were in this thing together. And so how is it that moving forward, we kind of revert back to that same concept of we are all in this together. From Cynthia finalizing, I'm truly appreciative of being able to participate in this dialogue. So again, if anybody have any final comments, anything burning on your chest that you would want to make at this very point as we close off, I think it was a great conversation discussing development issues, which are women issues. I like that. Deborah says, I agree with Aisha. I expected to see them playing a much greater work during this pandemic, greater role during this pandemic. Anybody wants to add any final comment word? A reminder, please remember to take the survey. If you haven't registered, please remember to register. The link is in the chat. Please take the survey. Any final comments, anybody? Any final comments? Anything burning? Anybody wish to say anything? Final comments? If not, I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for joining us and hearing the perception, the ideas, the comments, the contributions. They were all great, insightful, and will surely contribute a lot to the reports that we are writing. I will remember gender equality and leadership. That was the resonating recommendation for future priority actions coming from the Belize chapter of the Caribbean Institute for Leadership, for Women in Leadership. Thanks a lot once again, and we will surely keep you engaged, as Perla has asked. If you can please ensure that you register so that we keep you on our file and on our radar, so for future conversations. But as importantly, in terms of letting you know, as the UN programs are rolled out and as we hear more about what is going to happen, how much you have contributed, how much you can stay engaged, and coming back to that same point of communicating, ensuring that as we move towards the goals and targets that we have set, how we are doing and how we are making progress, and how women can become much more involved in decision making. So thanks a lot. I do appreciate it. And I think we're getting a Stay Safe, real educational. Thanks for the consultation. And we're all hopeful about Seawell. Of course we are. We are Seawell. Thanks a lot once again, and stay safe. Wash your hands, wear your mask, and please practice social distancing. And like me, stay home if you don't have to go no way. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.